Hello, my name is Pamela Mitzi, Director of the Prevention Resource Center at South Oaks Hospital. The PRC makes prevention science a reality in changing the lives of families and communities here in Suffolk. We are here to prove prevention works. In today's times, parents are often caught off guard when it comes to alcohol and drug use in their children's lives. As caretakers, we are prepared to protect our children's well-being, but are often less than ready to deal effectively with alcohol and other drug abuse or the disease of addiction. Suffolk's Prevention Resource Center has produced a series of informative videos that will equip parents with the tools vital in fostering positive outcomes when detecting and addressing substance abuse issues in the home. Some of Suffolk's best practitioners will share their expertise regarding children's alcohol and other drug use. One module explores the why and how of parents having a plan to intervene in their children's lives. Another is about how to approach a child who you suspect is using, and then how to improve their readiness for treatment. The last module provides a perspective on the effects of substance abuse on the family system. So thanks for coming in, Caroline.
Thanks.
It's really good to see you. We have a few questions. I want to have a conversation about helping out parents who are in the position of dealing with children or loved ones who are dealing with an addiction.
Okay, great, Pam. Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to this conversation.
Great. So tell me, what's the most important thing for parents to know about adolescent substance abuse in today's world?
Well, I think what's important for parents to know is that adolescents are using substances at a much younger age than, say, a generation ahead, or our generation, where kids are starting using drugs as early as 9 and 10 years old. I've been around the field for a long time. I'm an old dinosaur in this. It's been about 25 years. When I first started working with adolescents, the kids coming into treatment were 17, 18 years old, and they started using around 14 or 15. Now that the kids are using at 9 and 10, starting coming in for treatment at 15, 16, is very scary. The other important thing is parents need to know is it's not the same drugs that were out there in the 80s. Marijuana is much more potent, much more highly addicting. The kids are starting out with pills, and not just starting out with smoking cigarettes or alcohol use. The over-the-counter medication is being abused in schools, and it's very dangerous and deadly for our youth.
Right, I hear you. It's not just having one drink and a little dibble and dabble. People are really going for it.
Absolutely, and what's even more frightening is, again, the age that these kids are using it, or smoking pot at 12, 11 or 12 years old. If you think back, what were we doing when we were those ages? It wasn't smoking pot. We were still riding bikes, playing Little League, and being engaged a lot more with our families and with the community as a whole. That's not happening in today's society. We've become much more separate. And I think that that's playing a part into it, where parents aren't able to really connect with one another as much as they used to, or be able to connect with the school. So it's, what's the plan? How does a parent, battle iPods and computer games and what, the images that are seen on the screen? How do they combat that to get their kids' attention and to get them engaged in pro-social activities and not fall off to substance use?
And so what do you suggest that they do?
Well, there's a couple of things that parents need to do. One, they have to make sure that their spouse or the child's other parent, whether or not they're still together, are on the same page. Okay, so the parents need to sit down and have a conversation as to what are we going to do the first time, little Jimmy or little Sarah comes home drunk or high, or asks, to have a beer at a family party. So parents need to be clear on where do they stand about it, what's acceptable, what's not. I'd like to remind parents that, the drinking age is 21, it's not 16. That parents need to take responsibility for what goes on in their own home. And if mom and dad are not on the same page, they need to work together to get that compromise as what's acceptable and what are the consequences going to be if and when the child comes home. And are they both sending a clear message that drugs are not acceptable, to be used in the house or outside of the house, and that alcohol will not be tolerated until they're 21 years of age. For parents that are divorced, I always ask them to love their children more than they dislike each other.
Oh, that's a good one.
So that they can work together, because it's the child that pays the price.
So tell us more about coming up with a plan. Do you actually write it out? When do you add the kids in the deal?
Okay. Well, it's interesting. I mean, we plan for our futures. We buy life insurance. We make sure that we have medical insurance and things like that. We plan for college. Why don't we plan for things, and for substance use, especially when parents always think it's a rite of passage for a child to start experimenting with drugs and alcohol. So you can write things. I'm a list maker. That's how I make sure that my thoughts are all together. So yeah, sometimes, a parent can sit down and make a list. How educated is the parent on the drugs that are out there? Are they asking the right questions of the kids? Such as, are drugs available in your school? Now, if a child says, oh no, I've never seen it, don't stop there, because in most schools, and this isn't a bash on the school districts, there are drugs in our schools, mainly because that's where the kids are. Okay, they're not going to clubs, so that's where they're going to get their drugs. What is the information that the kids know about it? What's the understanding? Have the parents get educated on what are some of the slang terms for the drugs that are out there. There's K2, there's Spike, there's all sorts of new names that are constantly coming out, and I learn them from the kids that I work with in my program. So can they make the plan? How are they going to make sure that their child is where they say they are? Cell phones are wonderful things. I'm going to call my child on my cell phone, or I'm going to text. Can they get a way where they're going to be able to see their child? Drop them off at a certain location and pick them up at the same location. Are they going to be able to drive by and make sure that they haven't left that location? And if they do, what are the consequences? And a consequence, when we punish our children, we got to remember that, grounding them for a year or grounding them till they're 35 isn't really effective.
Sounds familiar, though.
Right. I mean, and that's what I always ask the parents when I go out and do these engagements in schools. And it's, remember, when you're going to give a child a consequence, that you're the one that has to go along with that consequence too. So if you can only stand pulling your kid's TV privileges or computer privileges for 3 days, then only make it for 3 days, not a week. Because if you give in after those 3 days, the kids now learn that, you may not always mean what you say. So that transfers then the power to the child and not the parent.
Right.
So, there are different things, and find out what matters to your child. What do they like? What don't they like? We've talked about, in previous episodes about warning signs, where, are there always these major red flags that go off when a child starts using drugs? And it's not always the case. When we see parents, it's usually, I didn't know, or why didn't I know? Why didn't I say? So there are some things that we as parents have to really take a look at ourselves and what our value system is, and what kind of role models are we being for our kids. We tell our kids don't drink and drive, but yet we'll go out to dinner and have a couple of glasses of wine or beer and put the kids in the car and drive home. Or we serve alcohol in our home and we send everybody out.
Right.
We send mixed messages.
What about for those parents who may have used drugs or alcohol in their, or abused drugs in their past? And how does that work into developing the plan? And do you tell the kids, or is there an age?
It depends on the relationship with the child. It depends on the maturity of the child. My response always to a parent, when they do want to be honest with their kid, and well, my children, we have an open, honest relationship. Yeah, that's great, but there's some information that your kids don't need to know. What benefit is it? And how is this information, if I give it to my child, going to benefit my child? If my child is the type that learns from other people's mistakes, then yeah, maybe I would open up and say, you know what, I tried it, didn't like it, or whatever. But if your child isn't in that category, why give them ideas or give them something to whip out on you that's going to tie your hands?
Right, right. And the experts do say that those strong messages from parents remain with those kids.
Absolutely, and these are the consequences if you break it.
Oh, right,
Okay.
that part too.
Yeah, definitely add that part in. I mean, what I've love working with kids is when you give them what the expectation is. When you put out there, you know, this is what I expect your behavior to be, this is what I expect your grades to be, this, you know, how many of us leave the house, you know, with our kids and we're going out to dinner and we want you to behave, you're going to sit down, you're not going to,
Right,
you know,
remember
run
your
around,
manners, right.
you know, mind your manners. It's a similar process. You know, one of the great things that I've learned over the years is, and, you know, we talked about a plan, is do your children have an escape route? That if they are in an uncomfortable situation, is there a way that they can get to you where you will know that, come get me? And for, you know, my nieces and my nephew, actually, and my sister came up with this brilliant plan that said if they wanted to be removed from a situation, not just around drugs and alcohol, but if they were uncomfortable, they would call my sister and they would say, oh, Aunt Caroline's coming over. You know, hi, Mom, how you doing? Oh, everything's good. Oh, Aunt Caroline's coming over. When my nieces or nephews said that, my sister knew immediately, stop what she's doing and go get them.
Right.
And this way they could save face with their friends.
Right.
And be like, I gotta go, my mother, you know, my stupid aunt's coming. You know, and get in the car, and they had a deal that my sister, when they got in the car, they would have till the ride home to tell my sister what was going on and why did they want to leave. It wasn't like, you know, well, I was just bored and I wanted to come home. That was like the Batman signal coming up. It was like emergency. And if they weren't able to discuss what was going on, by the time they got home, they sat at the kitchen table and waited until it all came out. And that's how they learned how to avoid the pitfalls of getting involved in negative situations.
Right. That sounds great.
It worked.
A great plan. Are there other effective strategies that, you know, help to raise a drug-free child?
Well, I think one of the most important reasons why kids use drugs is they say they like the way it makes them feel. So we do a wonderful job of raising human doings. We make sure that they're involved in all sorts of activities and sports. They go here at this time, there at that time, and so on. We structure them to be human doings. We don't really talk about feelings. We don't teach our kids, you know, that it's okay to be angry and upset, and then how to behave with that. You know, kids play the game of comparing their insides to everybody else's outsides. You know, where somebody else is always smarter or prettier or better athlete. Getting our kids to talk about how they feel and getting them to have healthier behaviors with that will discourage them from putting something in their body to change how they feel. And part of our situation today is we're a society that says if you have a problem, take a pill.
Right.
Okay, I mean,
so true.
Everything's a disorder nowadays.
Right.
So we learn that quick fix. If we teach our kids how to delay that gratification, if we teach them how to verbalize their feelings, we will find that they'll decrease the desire to act out with drugs or alcohol, where they can say no because they feel good about themselves. They know that if they do something different, that'll change how they feel.
So that sounds good.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, are there any pointers with approaching a partner or a spouse who's not on the same page? For whatever reason, either they just want to leave it, they don't want to observe the problem, or they just don't want to be involved, or they really have some issues themselves. How do you approach someone who needs to be on the same page with you?
Or at least in the same book. There's a number of different ways, and again, it's reaching a compromise. There are some parents that don't like being the disciplinarian, they want to be the friend. If that's the case, then that person needs to take a step back and let the other parent, who is going to be able to lay down the law, be able to do that with the child and not contradict that parent in front of the child. Kids are real good at knowing if there is a split and playing that split, and playing one parent against the other. If there is, you know, maybe a not so amicable divorce or separation, and mom or dad are playing the sympathies or playing one parent against the other with the child, if the parent is consistent with the message of this is not acceptable behavior, this is not acceptable, you know, use in my home or outside, that message will stick. There'll be complications along the way, but again, it's trying to be adults and have a conversation and communicate with each other, and take your own stuff out of it. You're talking about your child here. You're not talking about, you know, your marriage. That's a separate issue. You're talking about a life here.
So tell us, what are some of the warning signs, some of the clues that some parent might pick up on for further investigation that their child may be involved?
Okay, well, one of the major clues is somebody calling and saying, listen, your son or daughter's been drinking, okay, or smoking pot. That's a big clue. Don't negate that. And I bring that up only because I've had parents come in to the program who said, well, you know what, I did find out a month ago that, he was smoking pot. So that's a big clue. The other one is they're more subtle, such as they become a little bit more disrespectful, all right, to the parents. They start being a little bit more willful as far as, pushing the boundaries, challenging your authority, coming in late, missing curfew, or breaking curfew altogether, or constantly wanting to be out of the house. Falling grades is a sign. For some kids that never were great students, you know that they have the potential to do better, but they're not getting there, and they're falling off even more. Items found in the home that you don't recognize, such as, like a pipe or pens that don't have the insides in anymore, or finding, spoons and candles all of a sudden in the room, incense. So different items found. Items that are missing. All of a sudden, where's your iPod? Oh, I lost it. Well, that's the third one you've lost in 6 months. The Xbox disappears. Jewelry starts missing. Money starts being asked for a little bit more or is missing. Somehow, some of the tricks the kids use to get money, oh, Mom, we're going on a field trip, I need $35. Or my favorite was, Mom, it's Jimmy's birthday tonight, can I have $20 to put in a birthday card? And he'd buy the card, and the kid would take the money out of the card, put it in his pocket, and give Jimmy, an empty card. So those are some of the early warning signs. Also, new friends. All of a sudden the friends start changing, and you don't know them, and you don't know the parents. And when you ask about what happened to the old friends, some kids are even clever enough to say, oh, well, Billy's using drugs, so I'm not hanging out with him anymore. And the parent says, oh, thank God. But here's my question, to that parent is, well, now what do you do with that information? Do you call Billy's parents because, you've known Billy since he's 5 and now your child is 15? Do you make that phone call to the parent, or do you speak to Billy? A lot of times we do hands off and say, oh, thank God, it's not my kid. When in fact it is your kid, and Billy stopped hanging out with your kid because he's the one using. One of the most important things that a parent ever said, I think, in a presentation was the worst day of her life was the day she realized that her kid was the one she didn't want her kid hanging out with.
Right.
Okay,
right.
That he actually was the problem. It wasn't the friends. It was her kid. He made the decisions. So those are some of the things to look for. They are very similar to adolescence, normal adolescence. But again, I'm going to ask parents to check with their gut. Okay, don't rationalize the behavior away. Don't fluff it off to, just normal adolescent angst. Follow up, ask the questions. Are you doing drugs? When they tell you no and you say, thank God, why not? What are you doing instead? Have them be held accountable, okay, for it. I have had so many parents, are you smoking pot? And the kid says no. The kid walks away and he's like, I'm doing Xanax. And the kid thinks they're telling the truth because you only asked about pot.
Right.
So as parents, we need to be prepared to also hear the answers, okay? If we suspect that there's something and we're nervous about it, reach out. Reach out to the social workers, reach out to the Prevention Resource Network, reach out to local treatment providers. The clergy will help you. It's out here. Don't be ashamed to ask. There's no shame in addressing an issue. Okay, there's shame and guilt in not addressing it and putting our heads in the sand. We're losing too many kids. These kids are our future. We need to protect them. We need to stand up and be the adults and work together.
Right.
I think that's the most important thing.
I agree. So we should call our fellow parents and have the conversation with them. Right. We should prepare ourselves and educate ourselves and be ready to have the conversation with our kids. We should have the conversation with our kids. Make a plan, have consequences. Did I forget anything?
Follow through with the consequences.
Oh.
And most importantly,
that's the hard part.
Right. But most importantly, be a role model. Don't say one thing and do another, because please remember that no matter what, our kids look up to us. We are their first superheroes, and we will always be. And if we're consistent in our behavior and our message, then our kids will be planting those very powerful seeds. and if we're empowering the other adults around us, such as teachers, aunts, uncles, significant others, neighbors,
Right.
okay, then our kids have all the support that they're going to need to be able to make healthy decisions, and if they don't, we'll be able to catch it and address it a lot quicker.
Right, right.
So it's very important.
Well, thanks so much for coming in. I really appreciate it. I think you've given us quite a bit of food for thought and action steps to take, and I think that it'll be great.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Pam.
Okay. We hope you've learned valuable strategies from our discussion that can be used to benefit your family. By planning to prevent, we best prepare to protect. I'm your host, Pamela Mitzi, and thank you for joining us here at the Prevention Resource Center, where we prove prevention works. For questions, comments, or suggestions for additional learning modules, please email us by clicking on Contact PRC here on our site.